Hey, remember that time I said I would see you again next week and then didn't upload for 3 weeks? Oops.
The idea that human and chimp DNA overlap by 98 to 99% has been widely used to promote the idea that humans and chimps shared a common ancestor millions of years ago.
Not really. The fact that chimpanzees and humans share a 99% DNA match is not just used to show that we have a common ancestor, as that was already perfectly evident before DNA sequencing. What it is used to show is just how close that common ancestry truly is.
But have you considered how they came up with this estimate? One of the things that not many people know about this study is that large sections of DNA from both the human and the chimp genome were left out when making this comparison.
Yes, large sections of non-coding DNA were removed in order to only compare the relevant portions of the genome. Maybe to somebody who is not a scientist, this can seem like a problem, but that's why the educated professionals who made that decision are in the lab actively testing things, and you are a layman making an ignorance-based video attempting to counter these experts in their field of expertise.
Let's see how Minute Earth, a secular training site that holds to an evolutionary perspective, describes it.
When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
I went and found the video that you reference here, as you did not link it below, and I will watch the whole thing, expecting you to have taken their video out of context. What I found, however, is something different, that being a video put out by science communicators, the main message of which actually does seem to be, maybe we aren't quite as similar to chimps as they say. However, as I understood this to be in conflict with the general scientific consensus among experts at this time, I dug a bit deeper. On the About tab of the Minute Earth YouTube channel, there's a list of the people who were involved in the producing of their videos. There are a total of 7 people listed as creators for the channel, most of whom, based on some light research, don't really seem to be experts in any sort of scientific field, but rather science enthusiasts and science communicators, with the possible exceptions of Peter Reich, a professor in environmental science, and David Goldenberg, an MD. However, while these two certainly do have science degrees, they're also not in the relevant fields of genetics and evolutionary biology. While it is still somewhat surprising that they would make a video casting doubt on the claims of experts within those fields, what it does not do is make the claims of those experts invalid based on the understanding of non-peer-reviewed science educators on YouTube.
Wow, ignoring 18% of the chimp genome and 25% of the human genome. That's a lot to ignore. In fact, this represents hundreds of millions in each side of the comparison. Could the sections they left out be responsible for coding most of the obvious differences we see between humans and chimps? The video explains.
And there's another problem. Just as a small tweak in a sentence can alter its meaning entirely, or not at all, a few mutations in DNA sometimes produce big changes in a creature's looks or behavior, whereas other times, lots of mutations make very little difference. So just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are.
And despite my conflict with the general topic of their video, I will say that the big picture idea of it is true, and that is the part that you've deliberately left out. So let's add that back in, shall we?
So just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are. But that doesn't mean we can't learn anything by comparing their genomes. DNA contains a record of the evolutionary relationships between all organisms. It's a garbled record, but by reading closely, we've been able to glean enough information to refine the evolutionary trees we started drawing long before genome sequencing was around. We may not actually be 99% chimp, but we are 100% great ape, and at least a little bananas.
Now, with a channel name like Genesis Apologetics, I don't really expect you to accept evolution to any legitimate extent. However, even this video that you're using as a source to prove your point makes very clear that evolution is absolutely a thing that happens, and that even if chimpanzees and humans were not 99% similar genetically, we still undeniably share a common ancestor and diverged cladistically from each other rather recently in an evolutionary timescale. So, after this lengthy section of you relying on another video to do your arguing for you, I'm left wondering why you thought it was a viable source for you to use.
It certainly makes sense that just counting up the number of genetic changes doesn't really tell us that much about how similar or different two creatures are. Indeed, human DNA and gene-level comparisons are frequently made to other mammals, such as mice, cows, and even dogs with high levels of overlap. And we are obviously quite different from these animals. The fact is, the human and chimp genomes code for two completely different creatures. While both are mammals based on scientific criteria, God made man in His image and gave him a soul that is eternal.
And there it is. Alright, let's clarify some things first. Yes, we are both mammals. However, before that, we are also both made of cells. The cells that compose both of us are eukaryotic. We're both bilaterally symmetrical. We're both deuterostomes, with the initial indentation into the chimp and human embryos forming into the anus rather than the mouth. We are both vertebrates. We both have bony internal skeletons. We both have forelimbs. We're both amniotes. We both have hair and mammary glands. We are both primates. We are both apes, as we are both primates without tails. I could go on, however, I would suggest that you instead go watch the Systematic Classification of Life by Aaron Ra. He's currently 37 episodes into this series, which has followed the track of human evolution all the way from single-celled organisms and will eventually make its way all the way to Homo sapiens. I'm sure anybody watching this video is either already familiar with this series or somebody who wouldn't be able to make it through without combusting from the sheer cognitive dissonance fighting inside of them, but just in case, I'll go ahead and link his playlist in the description down below. Okay, now I feel like there was something I missed there. Let me go back and check again.
While both are mammals based on scientific criteria, God made man in His image and gave him a soul that is eternal.
Oh, right. That. I mean, I could say a lot about just that assertion right there. However, I think just as much could be accomplished by asking where your proof is for that assertion. Because if your only proof for a position is found within a collection of Bronze Age fairy tales, you don't have any proof. And if you don't have any proof for a position, then you have very little, if any, reason to hold said position.
Chimps, which are soulless tree-dwelling animals, and humans, which are eternal souls wrapped in bodies that have vastly different capabilities than all animals, because we were created in God's image and charged to be caretakers over creation, including chimps.
Damn, this guy really does not want to be compared to a chimpanzee. What the fuck have chimpanzees done to you, man? Well, I hate to break it to you, but you don't have a soul either, which only makes you closer to a chimpanzee. Maybe even as close as 99%.
Being made in the image of God and charged with taking care over God's creation would mean that humans would have several distinctions from chimps. Let's take a look at just some of them.
Oh, I am so ready to hear about them.
First, humans are the only living thing on the planet that has a conscience and a sense of morality. Our conscience lets us know when we failed or when we might fail to abide by either governmental laws or God's laws. Primates know nothing of laws. They live only by instincts.
Wrong. This is even worse than making a claim that could be easily debunked with a 30-second Google search. Are you telling me that you have never seen animals show empathy or other complex emotions? You've never walked into a room to find a dog doing something it shouldn't, only to watch the dog avoid eye contact, knowing that it did something it shouldn't have done? And that's just a dog. Non-human primates have been observed doing much more, like chimpanzees who hug and hold other chimpanzees who are injured or sick. When comforting others, elephants make a special sound that they've never been observed making apart from other elephants. When members of many animal communities are killed, the rest of the community mourns them just as humans do. If you're going to die on the hill of animals not feeling like humans do, you are more than welcome to go fuck yourself.
Next, humans can speak. For example, the English language contains over 1 million words, and we can speak all of them. Plus, we can even learn or invent totally different languages. Apes cannot speak any of them. They do not even have a speech program installed in their brains.
Actually, it's not a mental inability that keeps primates from speaking, but a physical one. Other great apes do not have the complex vocal cords and control over their larynx that humans do, which keeps them from being able to speak. If it was a mental block, they certainly would not be able to learn sign language, which some have. If you've never seen this, I would suggest you take a look. It is one of the absolute coolest fucking things I have ever seen.
Speaking of brains, ours are 400% larger than chimps. We're also much smarter, having an average IQ of 100 when chimps can't even take the test.
Wow, a test designed for humans can't be completed by chimpanzees? That's crazy. I can't imagine why that would be. Again, I invite you to watch another video I'll link down below of an orangutan being taught to associate symbols with words in order to effectively communicate with humans.
Our brain cells' DNA carries very unique methylation patterns that enables us to think the way we do. The human neocortex is disproportionately large compared to the rest of the brain, with a 60-to-1 ratio of gray matter to the size of the medulla in our brainstems compared to just 30-to-1 in chimps. Overall, humans have almost twice as many spindle cells than chimps, enabling us to pull out memories from past experiences and use them to plot our next actions. These functions activate when moral dilemmas present decisions we need to make that will directly affect other lives.
But here's your problem. You're looking at this as if the end goal of all species, if evolution were to happen, would be human brains. But that's not how evolution works. Evolution does not have an end goal as it works. Rather, if there is no significant pressures to force a species to grow larger brains, they won't do so. Chimpanzees have just as much intelligence as they need in order to live as they do. Were a subsection of the species to figure out how to utilize fire or agriculture as humans did, that subset of chimps would likely evolve, if they stayed that course, with a preference for larger brains in order to take advantage of their new discoveries.
The insula part of our brains has 46 times the number of spindle cells compared to chimps, about 83,000 for humans compared to only about 1,800 for chimps. This makes sense because this part of our brain takes information from our skin, internal organs, and cardio system and converts it into subjective feelings such as empathy towards others who show signs of anguish or pain.
And as one should expect, based on the data that you just gave of chimps having 1,800 of these cells, despite that number being lower than humans, chimps absolutely do show empathy. They have complex emotions just like humans. I am somewhat perplexed as to why it seems to matter to you that complex emotions be strictly human.
Our DNA differences direct the construction of uniquely human physical attributes. For example, we are typically 38% taller than chimps, 80% heavier, and live twice as long.
While this certainly is not a direct comparison to what you've just said, it is something I found somewhat interesting. You say that humans are, on average, about 38% taller than chimps. The tallest man ever recorded was 8 foot 11 inches, which, if you're an average American male height of about 5 foot 9, this man was just about 35% taller than you. But he was still not just within your distinct clade, but within your own species. In an even more extreme example, in relation to humans being on average 80% heavier than chimps, the heaviest man to ever live was 1,400 pounds. If we assume once again that you are the weight of an average American man, you weigh roughly 190 pounds, which means this man was roughly 86% heavier than you, but he was still in the same species as you. As far as your statistics for age, they are absolutely laughable. Statistics for an average chimpanzee lifespan vary, but even if we take a low estimate of around 30 years, this is roughly comparable to the average human lifespan up until the mid-1800s with the beginnings of modern medicine. Humans live longer because we create vaccines and fight diseases that would otherwise have killed us.
We have eye whites for rich and nuanced nonverbal communication, which no apes have.
I believe what you really mean to say is that no non-human apes have eye whites, because we are certainly apes. I really hope you're not going to try and casually dispute that.
We walk upright, while chimps, with their curved fingers, long arms, and unique locking wrist systems, are designed for living in trees and walking on all fours.
They were not designed this way. They evolved to walk this way to suit their environment. Or, if I'm wrong and they were designed, why do they, along with humans and all other apes, have vestigial tails in their embryological state and tail bones, if they were designed to not have a tail?
Their knees also point outward for climbing in trees, whereas our knees point forward so we can walk or run all day if needed.
Yes, however, chimpanzees are capable of walking on only 2 legs, as was most likely the common ancestor that we share with them. The difference is that the line from that common ancestor that became humans lived in the plains, where it is more useful to stand up higher in order to see potential predators in the grass, whereas the line that became chimpanzees lived in the forests and jungles and therefore benefited more from the better climbing abilities. And as such, those members of each species that were better adapted to their particular environment survived longer to reproduce and pass on their beneficial genes. This is very simple.
We can't even swap any of our internal organs with chimps. Humans build space shuttles, write songs, worship, pray, and sing. Chimps don't do any of these things.
Maybe the chimps were simply smart enough to not waste their time worshipping and praying to a chimpanzee god that they've yet to invent as we invented our own gods.
God specifically designed us, formed the first of us from dust into the image of God, and gave each of us an everlasting soul. We were charged to be caretakers over the entire animal kingdom. Yes, we share vast DNA sequences with chimps, but we should expect this on the basis of creation. We also share plenty of DNA with mammals other than chimps. After all, God made mammals and man to metabolize the same food sources, grow the same basic materials like bones, teeth, muscles, skin, and hair, and produce placentas and milk for the next generation. The fact that we have sections of DNA that are similar to these creatures only shows that our designer used similar DNA instructions for making similar features and functions. It does not mean that one creature led to the other.
Sure, if you want, you can decide that it makes sense for your god to make species individually but to give them similar DNA. However, before you can expect anyone else to believe as you do, you need to provide a working model that accounts for everything that evolution already does, such as
pseudogenes and atavisms, fossils and homology, ERVs and embryology, organs and behaviors which are vestigial, phylogenetic trees, cytochrome C, and there's human chromosome 2 with its centromeres and telomeres, species distribution which prove evolution. I could go on.
Bible-believing geneticist Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins said, "The programmer doesn't start from scratch each time he develops a new program. Instead, he uses the same general command that he used for other projects. It shows the creator's efficiency and ingenuity."
If we are to believe that your god is a mortal being with limited time and limited resources, then sure, that makes perfect sense. However, if you insist on your god being eternal and omnipotent, which I'm sure you will, then sadly you do not have an argument here.
We see the same pattern of both similarity and differences in organisms' genomes.
Okay, so either you made this visual and you believe it makes perfect sense for orangutans, gorillas, and chimps to all come from a common ancestor, but that humans are necessarily separate for some bullshit divine reason, or you found this online and didn't even look close enough to realize that this shows evolution between chimps and orangutans, which, believe it or not, share bigger genetic differences than do humans and chimps. Also, is this diagram claiming that the original dog that evolved into all other types of dogs was a fucking beagle? God damn, people are stupid.
Biblical creationists say the similarities in DNA arose because the same creator adapted the same basic code for separate created kinds.
Biblical creationists are also, as a general rule, either brainwashed or morons. So, you got that.
If a gene in different creatures encodes a similar protein for a similar biochemical pathway, it's not due to evolution, but because of a single programmer. This similarity is a hallmark of all human-engineered systems, so why should we not expect to see it in God's creation?
Did you catch that? This is something that we find in all things created by humans, so why wouldn't we see it in God too? It's almost like God is just another thing invented by humans.
Clearly, overhyped stories of chimp-human similarities overlook some basic observations. They overlook huge sections of DNA. They overlook the possibility of intentional programming to explain similar DNA sequences. And they overlook unbridgeable physical, mental, and moral differences that all fit the Bible's idea of divine creation.
Oh god, that was painful. Amazing how many flawed ideas can come about as products of simply not understanding, which in today's world essentially boils down to not wanting to understand, evolution. As always, I'm not a scientist myself, so there's always a chance that I could have gotten some details wrong in here, so if you notice any, feel free to let me know in the comments down below, along with suggestions of what you would like to see in the future. Thank you all very much for watching, and as always, have a blessed day, fellow heathens.